The brass bell above Morgan's shop door chimed softly as Darius pushed inside, immediately enveloped by the heady mixture of dried herbs and something indefinably mystical. Crystalline bottles lined wooden shelves that stretched impossibly high, their contents glowing with inner light that defied explanation. At 23, Darius had visited enough apothecaries throughout the kingdom to know that Morgan's establishment was different, dangerous, perhaps, but undeniably effective. Just a moment, came a melodious voice from behind a curtain of hanging beads. Morgan emerged, her auburn hair twisted into an intricate braid adorned with small silver charms that tinkled when she moved. Her emerald eyes assessed him with an intensity that made Darius suddenly self-conscious about the fresh bandage wrapped around his forearm. "Training accident," he explained, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the angry red wound beneath. "My sword master says I need proper healing before tomorrow's examination. Nothing fancy, just something to speed the process." Morgan's gaze lingered on the cut, then traveled up to meet his eyes. "Of course, I have exactly what you need." She glided toward the shelves with fluid grace, her dark green dress rustling against the floorboards. Standard regenerative salve, very effective for sword wounds. As she reached for a vial, her sleeve caught on a neighboring bottle, sending it tumbling. With reflexes honed by years of combat training, Darius lunged forward and caught it before it could shatter. The glass was warm against his palm, and for a moment he could swear the liquid inside pulsed with its own heartbeat. "Careful with that one," Morgan said, her voice suddenly tight. She took the vial from his hands, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Darius, not unpleasant, but definitely notable. "It's not meant for you." Something in her tone made him look closer at what she'd nearly dropped. The liquid was an unusual shade of deep violet, almost black in the dim light, with silver threads that seemed to move of their own accord. "What is it?" "Nothing you need concern yourself with," she replied quickly, tucking the mysterious vial behind other bottles. She selected a different container, this one filled with ordinary-looking amber liquid, and turned back to him. "This should heal your wound completely within hours." Darius accepted the vial, noting its surprising weight. "How much do I owe you? 3 silver pieces?" Morgan's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and he noticed she kept glancing toward where she'd hidden the other bottle. "Drink it all at once for best results." "And Darius?" She paused, as if reconsidering her words. "Come back tomorrow if you experience any unusual effects." The phrasing struck him as odd, but sword examinations waited for no one. He paid her quickly and left the shop, stepping back into the late afternoon sunlight. The academy grounds were only a few blocks away, and he decided to take the potion immediately rather than risk forgetting. The liquid burned pleasantly as it slid down his throat, tasting of honey and something exotic he couldn't identify. Almost immediately, he felt a warming sensation spread through his chest, then outward to his limbs. His wounded arm tingled, and when he unwrapped the bandage, he was amazed to see the cut already beginning to close. But as he walked, other changes became apparent. His vision seemed sharper, colors more vivid. His hearing picked up conversations from impossible distances. Most unsettling of all was the strange energy building in his core. Not painful, but definitely not normal. By the time he reached his dormitory, Darius knew something was very wrong. The potion Morgan had given him was clearly not a simple healing salve. As he stared at his reflection in the wash basin, noting how his ordinary brown eyes now held flecks of the same violet he'd seen in that other vial, one thought echoed in his mind. What exactly had she given him, and why did he suspect it hadn't been an accident? The Dragon's Hearth Tavern buzzed with its usual evening crowd of academy students and local merchants, but Darius felt like every eye was on him. He'd come here hoping normalcy might settle, whatever was happening to his body, but the changes were accelerating. His skin felt hypersensitive, every brush of fabric against his arms sending shivers through him. Worse, he could smell things no human should be able to detect: the fear sweat of a nervous card player 3 tables away, the lingering perfume of a woman who'd left hours ago. "You look terrible," Seraphine observed, sliding a mug of ale across a scarred wooden bar. The tavern keeper's silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her keen blue eyes missed nothing. At 45, she'd seen enough strange happenings in this border town to recognize when something was amiss. "And I don't mean regular terrible. You're radiating something that's making my other customers nervous." Darius wrapped his hands around the mug, grateful for its coolness against his increasingly warm palms. "Just tired. Long day of training." The lie felt heavy on his tongue, especially when he noticed several patrons had indeed moved to tables farther from the bar. "Hung." Seraphine leaned closer, studying his face. "Your eyes are different. They weren't violet this morning when you came in for breakfast." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What kind of trouble are you in, boy?" Before Darius could answer, the tavern door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Bastian strode in, his town guard uniform impeccable despite the late hour. At 38, the man was built like a siege engine: broad shoulders, thick arms, and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. His dark eyes swept the room before settling on Darius with unmistakable suspicion. "Evening, Seraphine," Bastian said, not taking his gaze off Darius. "I've had some interesting reports today. Seems someone's been exhibiting unusual behavior around town. Inhuman speed, impossible strength, unnatural awareness." He stepped closer to the bar. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, scholar?" Darius's heart hammered against his ribs, and he could swear everyone in the tavern could hear. I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because Mrs. Holbrook swears she saw you leap over her garden fence in a single bound." "That's a 6-foot wall, son." Bastian's hand rested casually on his sword hilt. "And young Timothy claims you caught his runaway horse with your bare hands." Animal was spooked by thunder, running full tilt. The truth was, Darius barely remembered those incidents. His body had moved without conscious thought, reacting with capabilities that shouldn't exist. Maybe they were mistaken. Maybe. Bastian's smile held no warmth. "But then there's the matter of the scorch marks." Seraphine's eyebrows shot up. "Scorch marks?" "Found them on the Academy's training ground. Perfect handprints burned into solid stone." Bastian leaned against the bar, his bulk making the wooden structure creak. "Now, I'm not saying our young scholar here is responsible, but the timing is awfully convenient." Darius stared down at his hands, horrified. He'd noticed they felt unnaturally warm, but burning stone? The energy building in his chest pulsed. Stronger, and he fought to keep it contained. Whatever Morgan had given him was getting worse. "There's got to be an explanation," Seraphine said diplomatically, though her eyes remained fixed on Darius's increasingly pale face. "Oh, there is," Bastian replied. "The question is whether it's natural or not. See, in my experience, when someone suddenly develops impossible abilities overnight, it usually involves magic. Dark magic." His voice hardened. "The kind that requires investigation by the Crown's Inquisitors." The mention of Inquisitors sent ice through Darius's veins. Everyone knew what happened to those accused of unauthorized magical practices. The lucky ones were merely stripped of their abilities and exiled. The unlucky ones simply disappeared. "I need some air," Darius mumbled, standing abruptly. The motion sent the strange energy coursing through him, and he watched in horror as frost began forming on his mug. Bastian's eyes narrowed. "I don't think so. I think you and I need to have a longer conversation." But Darius was already moving, his enhanced reflexes carrying him toward the door faster than any normal human could react. Behind him, he heard Seraphine's sharp intake of breath and Bastion's curse as the guard realized his quarry was escaping. As Darius burst into the night air, one thought consumed him. He had to find Morgan and discover what she'd done to him before Bastion's suspicions became official charges. The problem was, he wasn't sure he could control whatever was happening to him long enough to get answers. The energy in his chest pulsed again, stronger this time, and somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard someone laughing. Morgan's shop stood dark against the midnight sky, but Darius could see warm light flickering through cracks in the shuttered windows. His enhanced senses picked up voices inside Morgan's melodic tones mixed with another woman's sharper accent. He pressed himself against the side wall, trying to control the waves of heat radiating from his skin. Frost had begun forming on everything he touched, and the contradictory sensations were driving him to distraction. "Told you to be more careful with the vials," the unknown woman was saying. "The metamorphosis elixir isn't something you accidentally dispense to random customers." "It wasn't random," Morgan replied defensively. "And it wasn't entirely accidental either." Darius's blood chilled. Metamorphosis elixir. The name alone suggested permanent changes, not the simple healing he'd sought. He crept closer to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. Inside, Morgan stood facing a striking woman with jet-black hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the candlelight. The stranger wore traveling clothes of deep burgundy, and her dark eyes held an intensity that made Darius instinctively step back. "Explain yourself," the dark-haired woman demanded. Morgan's shoulders sagged. "Celestin, you know, I've been researching the old bloodlines. When that young scholar walked in today, I could sense it immediately. He carries dormant draconic heritage. The elixir was meant to awaken what was already inside him. Without his knowledge or consent?" Celestin's voice could have cut glass. "That's a violation of every magical accord we've sworn to uphold." Darius's legs nearly gave out. Draconic heritage? That explained the fire and ice warring in his system, the enhanced senses, the impossible strength. But it also meant his life, as he knew it was over. Dragons had been hunted to near extinction centuries ago, and anyone carrying their blood was considered a threat to the kingdom's stability. The potential was too strong to ignore, Morgan continued. Left dormant, it would have eventually manifested anyway, probably during a moment of extreme stress. At least this way, we can guide the transformation. We? Celestin laughed bitterly. "I came here to collect my commission for tracking down a rogue mage, not to become involved in your unauthorized experiments." She moved toward the door. "I'm leaving before this situation gets worse." Darius couldn't let her go, not when she might have answers about what was happening to him. He pushed through the shop's front door without bothering to knock. The bells chimed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Both women spun toward him, Morgan's face draining of color, while Celestin's hand dropped to a wicked-looking dagger. At her belt. "How much did you hear?" Morgan asked quietly. "Enough to know you've ruined my life," Darius replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. Heat waves shimmered around his clenched fists. "Draconic heritage? Do you have any idea what that means?" "It means you're more than human," Celestin said, studying him with professional interest. "The question is whether you're strong enough to handle it." "I don't want to handle it," Darius snapped. "I want it reversed, now." Morgan and Celestin exchanged glances. "It doesn't work that way," Morgan said gently. "The elixir doesn't create abilities. It unlocks what was already there. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. Then, you'll help me control it." It wasn't a request. Celestin stepped forward, her assessment complete. "He's already partially transformed. Look at his eyes. They're shifting between human brown and dragon violet. His body temperature is fluctuating wildly. She turned to Morgan. How long does he have before the change becomes irreversible? With his particular bloodline strength? Maybe 3 days. 3 days. Darius sank into a chair, the reality crashing over him. In 72 hours, he would either learn to control his awakening dragon nature or lose his humanity entirely. And somewhere, out there, Bastion was probably already preparing arrest warrants. There might be one option, Celestin said slowly, but it's dangerous, and it would require all three of us working together. Arius looked up at her, desperate hope flaring in his chest. What kind of option? Celestin's smile was sharp as a blade, the kind that might get us all killed. But first, we need to deal with your immediate problem. She gestured toward the window, where Darius could now see torchlight approaching through the darkness. Bastion, he breathed. Not just Bastion, Morgan said grimly, peering through the shutters. He's brought the entire town watch. And unless I'm mistaken, that's an Inquisitor's seal on the lead horse's bridle. The three of them stared at each other as the sound of armored boots grew louder. Whatever their next move was going to be, they had to make it fast. The pounding on Morgan's door echoed through the shop like thunder, followed by Bastion's authoritative voice. Open up. By order of the Crown, this establishment is under investigation for illegal magical practices. Celestin moved with liquid grace, extinguishing candles with precise gestures, while Morgan began stuffing crucial items into a leather satchel. Darius stood frozen, watching ice crystals spread across the floor where his feet touched, even as waves of heat distorted the air around his hands. There's a back entrance to the herb garden, Morgan whispered urgently. But they'll have it covered. Not necessarily, a new voice said from the shadows near the rear of the shop. All three spun toward the sound as a tall, angular man emerged from behind a bookshelf. His silver hair was pulled back severely, and his pale blue eyes held cold intelligence. Thorn, Morgan breathed, her face going white. Hello, my dear apprentice, Thorn said, his thin lips curving in a humorless smile. Still playing with forces beyond your comprehension, I see. He gestured toward Darius, whose transformation was accelerating under stress scales had begun, appearing along his forearms, glinting in the remaining candlelight. You're supposed to be in exile, Celestin said, her hand finding her dagger's hilt. Exile is such a flexible concept, Thorn replied smoothly, especially when one has information the Crown finds valuable. The pounding on the front door intensified, and he raised his voice slightly. Information about unauthorized dragon blood awakenings, for instance. Darius felt rage surge through him, and the temperature in the room spiked dangerously. Several glass bottles cracked from the sudden heat. You turned us in. I merely reported what I observed, Thorn said. Did you really think you could hide the magical resonance of a dragon awakening? The energy signature has been broadcasting across 3 provinces for hours. Before anyone could respond, the shop's rear door opened silently, revealing a woman who seemed to flow into the room like liquid shadow. She was perhaps 30, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that held depths of ancient knowledge. Her clothes were unremarkable, but she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Vivian, Celestin said, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing here? Cleaning up a mess that threatens to expose us all, Vivian replied, her gaze taking in the scene with calculating precision. The boy's awakening is connected to something much larger than a simple bloodline activation. Thorn's confident expression faltered slightly. Impossible. I've studied dragon genetics for decades and learned nothing of substance. Vivian cut him off. She approached Darius, who found himself unable to move under her penetrating stare. Show me your left shoulder blade. What? Why would I? Because, Vivian said, power thrumming in her voice. "You bear the mark of the first flame, and if I'm right, this entire kingdom is about to face something it's not prepared for." Compelled by forces he didn't understand, Darius pulled his shirt aside. There, etched in what looked like living fire beneath his skin, was a symbol he'd never seen before: a dragon wrapped around a burning sword. Morgan gasped. "That wasn't there this morning." "Because it only appears when the bloodline awakens," Vivian explained grimly. "Darius isn't just any dragon descendant. He's the last of the Flamebearers, the bloodline that once served as guardians between our world and the Shadow Realm." The front door exploded inward, splinters flying, as Bastion led a squad of armored guards into the shop. Behind them came a figure that made everyone in the room step back: an inquisitor in flowing black robes, his face hidden beneath a silver mask. "Nobody move," Bastion commanded, his sword drawn. His eyes swept the room, taking in the cracked bottles, the scorch marks on the floor, and the increasingly inhuman appearance of Darius's skin. "By the authority of the crown, you're all under arrest for—" His words died as the temperature in the room plummeted, frost spreading across every surface. But this wasn't coming from Darius. It was emanating from something else entirely. The shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe and expand, and a sound like breaking glass filled the air. "Too late," Vivian said, her voice carrying resigned acceptance. "The awakening has torn a rift. They're coming through." "What's coming through?" the Inquisitor demanded, but his question was answered as creatures of living shadow began pouring into the shop. Beings with too many teeth and eyes that burned like cold stars. Darius felt his dragon nature surge forward, no longer something to fear, but something desperately needed. Fire erupted from his hands as his transformation accelerated, scales spreading across his skin like armor. Around him, unlikely allies prepared to face an enemy none of them had expected. The real battle was just beginning. Chaos erupted in Morgan's shop as shadow creatures swarmed through the widening rift. Darius felt his humanity slip away as dragon instincts took control. His hands became claws wreathed in flame. His vision sharpened to inhuman clarity, and protective fury filled his chest. A shadow beast lunged at Celestin, only to be incinerated by a blast of fire that surprised even Darius with its intensity. "The rift is anchored to his awakening," Vivian shouted over the sound of battle, her own hands weaving complex spells. "That turned shadows solid, so Bastion could cut them down. As long as his transformation remains incomplete, it will keep growing." The Inquisitor had thrown back his hood, revealing a scarred face and eyes that glowed with borrowed power. "Then we end this now," he declared, raising a staff that hummed with deadly energy. "One dragon's death to save thousands." "Wait!" Morgan stepped between them, even as she fended off grasping shadow tendrils with crystalline barriers. "There's another way." The Flamebearers weren't just guardians, they were keys. He can seal the rift, but only if he accepts his full transformation. Darius grabbed a shadow creature that had been reaching for one of Bastion's guards, his enhanced strength allowing him to crush it like smoke. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means choosing," Vivian said, decapitating two shadow beasts with blades of pure light. Remain partially human, and eventually lose control, becoming a monster that feeds the rift's growth. Or embrace your dragon nature completely and gain the power to close it permanently. "But if I do that," Darius began, "you'll never be fully human again," Thorn finished, surprising everyone by defending their flank with precise spell work. "The irony is delicious. I sought to expose you as a threat, only to discover you're our salvation." A massive shadow creature, larger than the others, pushed through the rift. Its presence dropped the temperature so severely that breath came out in visible puffs. Bastion's sword passed harmlessly through its form, and even the Inquisitors' blessed weapons seemed ineffective. Guardian-class entity, Vivian said grimly. We can't fight that with conventional means. The creature turned its burning gaze on Darius, recognizing him as the source of the disturbance. When it spoke, its voice was like winter wind through dead leaves. Flamebearer, your awakening calls to us across the void. Complete your transformation, and we will have a worthy adversary. Remain as you are, and we will simply consume this realm. Darius looked around the shop at Morgan, whose guilt had driven her to risk everything to help him. At Celestin, the pragmatic hunter who'd chosen to stand with them. At Bastion, the duty-bound guard protecting people he'd sworn to serve. Even at Thorn, whose betrayal had inadvertently led to this moment of choice. They were all flawed, complicated. People who deserved better than to die because of his indecision. If I do this, he said to Vivian, will I still be me? You'll be more than you were, she replied honestly. But different. The dragon nature doesn't erase who you are. The guardian moved closer, shadow tendrils reaching. For the terrified guards, Darius made his choice. He stopped fighting the fire in his veins and let it consume him completely. Pain lanced through his body as bones reshaped, muscles expanded, and his skin became armored scales that gleamed like polished copper. Wings unfurled from his shoulders, and when he opened his mouth, dragon fire poured out in a torrent that made the shadow creatures recoil. But more importantly, he could feel the rift's connection to his awakening, could sense how to weave the threads of reality back together. Power flowed through him, not just fire, but the fundamental forces that separated dimensions. The battle that followed was brief but spectacular. Darius, now more dragon than human, but retaining his essential self, fought the guardian in a clash of fire and shadow that shattered what remained of the shop's windows. When it was over, the shadow creature lay defeated, and Darius pressed his clawed hands against the rift itself. Seal it, Vivian urged, before more come through. Drawing on instincts older than civilization, Darius wove fire and will into a pattern that forced the rift closed. The effort left him drained but triumphant. As the last shadows faded, he found himself surrounded by an unlikely group of allies. So, Bastion said, sheathing his sword, I suppose I'll have to file a very creative report about tonight. The Inquisitor studied Darius with new respect. The Crown will need to know about this. Dragons aren't extinct after all, and some of them fight for humanity rather than against it. Will they leave him alone? Morgan asked. They'll leave him alone, Vivian said with quiet authority. I'll make sure of it. As dawn broke over the ruined shop, Darius looked at his transformed hands, still recognizably his own, but now bearing scales and claws. He was changed forever, neither fully human nor fully dragon, but something new, something necessary. And despite everything, he found he wouldn't have it any other way.